Kia ora. Welcome everybody to our ongoing series of webinars on different features within Vernon CMS. Today we'll be looking at how you can manage different levels of cataloging within the system. Everything from simple object parts to complex group and member record relationships. I'm in our demo system where we have a sample of different types of objects that a museum or a collecting organisation might have. One of the things that you might need to manage are physically separable parts of an individual object in your collection. Here we've got a typical case where I've got a coffee set which comprises of multiple individual pieces, and we're managing that as one single set. We can see on the right that I've got multiple images depicting the individual pieces. If I want to describe those individual parts, perhaps because I want to go into a little bit more detail or because I need to manage those parts in some way, I can go to the second tab of the identification screen and I can list those parts. And we can see here I've given each of them a unique number, and Vernon can be set to default that number for you if you want to have a particular number format, letters or just numeric sequences. And then we can describe the names of the individual parts and optionally a longer description. So we can see we've got 11 pieces of this coffee set. Then throughout the rest of the catalogue record, there's some parts of the cataloguing which can be part specific. So we can see, for instance, on this tab that both the media measurement information allow us to record a part when we're putting entries. So we might record just the material of the whole object as I've done here, but we could list parts individually and say they're made of different materials. And you could have repeated entries for the same part if there were several different materials that you wanted to mark as being applying to just one of those parts. The same is true for the measurements, which we can see below. We've recorded the dimensions of each individual part. And again, you can repeat parts, so you might have framed and unframed measurements of just one panel of a triptych. And so you can repeat those entries as many times as you wish, and you may have different forms of measurements. Weights and dimensions would be a typical example. So we can now be part specific in several areas of the system. On the home page, we can see the location of this object, and the location is down to part level. So most of the time, you'll be saying that the whole of this object, in this case, the whole of this coffee set, is in a particular place. But at the moment, just part 10, the saucer, is temporarily in a different offsite store, maybe because it's about to be worked on as part of a condition report. The photography section isn't part specific, so all you could do is be specific in things like the caption. So if we look at the photo screen, each of those individual photographs is catalogued as a record in the photo AV file, and each of those can have its own specific caption. So in the caption is where you could note that this is an image of a specific part. So you could say, well, that's the coffee pot. It might even say the part number in there. And that's part of the information that shows then in Vernon whenever the images are visible, you'll see that caption available there. That can also be set to flow through to Vernon browser. So if you've got different captions per image, so you don't necessarily need parts to be able to do that. And they may not necessarily be images that are of a specific part. The caption, for instance, might note that this is signature in lower left corner, and you wouldn't be creating that as a part, but the caption can be specific then. So that's where the part table becomes particularly useful when you're just wanting to track a bit more basic detail, including the locations of those items. However, if the information about the individual part starts getting too complex, for example, if the production information is widely different for each part, then at that point, you're worth splitting those out into individual object records. So we can see, for instance, here, the maker information is for the whole of the object, and we don't have a way of saying that that's specific to one part. For instance, if you had an album of photographs, you could catalog that as a single object, but if the individual photos were taken by many different photographers, then you're probably best to manage that as individual items per photograph, and then to create a group record which links together all of those photographs into the one album. So let's look at some other examples of parts. I've got an example here of a box of soap that was collected from a historic hut in the Antarctic area. Again, on the second tab, we can see that we can record parts. So perhaps we're wanting to track the two different pieces of it. So I've recorded that it's got a box and the individual soap that's within the box. I've then recorded dimensions that are different for those, but I could go a step further and manage activities that this object is involved in at the part level. So the activities module is an optional add-on to Vernon, and so I've got that in the demo system. And I'll click on the activities management page on the left here, and we can see that it's been linked to a couple of different outward loans. If I double click on that, we can see that I've been part specific. So the borrowing organisation has asked just to borrow the box. That's all they need for this particular exhibition. So when it comes to activities, at any point you can say that instead of it being the whole of an object that's involved in that process, that it's just one or more specific parts. As well as parts of objects, we can manage items that are related to the collection, but aren't part of the formal accessioned collection that we normally manage. That's done through a new dedicated screen in Vernon CMS called the Accessory window. So we can manage items that are related to the collection and help you manage or use them in some way. An example would be in a library collection, you may have some significant dust jackets for some of the books. So the dust jacket of this particular book, we've got an image of that dust jacket that's discrete from the actual book itself. Those are two physically separable items, and we could have managed them just as object parts, but in this case I do have some complex information about this dust jacket. So it had an illustrator that's specific just to the dust jacket, and we may actually store it separately from the object in some cases. So it's a full object record in its own right, and any of the production, acquisition information can be kept independent of the library book that dust jacket wraps around normally. One key element of the accessory window is that we can relate an accessory to another object in the collection. So this particular dust jacket is specifically for a book in the collection. You may have dust jackets that are there just to protect the object and could be reused on different books in the collection, provided they were the same size. But in this case, we can see we have the related book in the collection, and it's been linked together in this related object table. So that related object table is also accessible through the generic group member and related object page on the left here. As well as things like dust jackets, we might manage accessories that are used to support an object in some way, perhaps when you're displaying the item. I've got an example of a display stand that I've catalogued, and again I've linked it to the relevant object in the collection that it relates to. So here I've got a display stand that's made specifically for one object in the collection. I've recorded details about what it's made from, where it's located, an image of it, and most critically I've linked it to which object in the collection it's usually used to support. That lets us manage this item in the collection in a more formal way, even though it's not part of our accessioned objects. A key part of the accessory window is also the status field. So that's how the system can organize whether things are inward loans, accessioned items, accessories, or possibly even things you're just considering acquiring. That status field lets you flag at what point this object is within its life cycle at the museum. Lastly, the accessory window can be used to manage accessories that are more technically complex. An example would be a display projector. Here I've got a digital projector, and again I've recorded some basic information about it. However, one of the things that I can record further on the accessory window is technical details about that item. And that's done through this technical type table here. The first column is a simple authority term file, and you can create any terms that are relevant for whatever technical information you're wanting to record about these items. If I go to the options, we can see some examples that we've set up in the demo system. So recording different types of electrical information, different types of display or digital specifications. With each of those, I can then be part specific, and then in the notes field, it's just free text to record whatever technical data you want to keep for that item. Again, I've got the related table to connect it to other works in the collection. But we can also be time specific for relationships. Here we can see that this particular digital film relied on the projector to present it, but only for a particular period. So we could continue adding in other related items over time, and that would build up to be a history of how that projector had been used. On the second page, we can also record pieces of this object that need to be periodically replaced. In Vernon CMS, we call those consumables, and they're managed through a new table which is accessible both through the second page of the accessory screen and through the physical aspect screen. So both technical information and consumables can be managed for any type of object, and both of those tables are available through the physical aspect screen. Here we can see that this particular digital projector relies on a specific light bulb. We can record when it was last replaced and when we think it's due for replacement. This particular projector relies on 6 light bulbs, so I'll put that in the notes column. This consumable column is an authority field, so you can only select terms that have been created, but it's linking to a complex file in its own right. I could use the Go To button on the top toolbar to see further details about that type of consumable. So at this point, we're describing general information about that type of light bulb, not how it applies to the one digital projector we were looking at. So I might describe further notes about the item. I might organize consumables into different types to help us manage those. We might have notes on how long that typically lasts or how much it costs. And then very importantly, we might want to note where we would go back to if we have to replace this item. So that's linking to your person and organization file, and that's allowing you to record full contact information about where you would go to get that particular item supplied again. So that's just linking to the person file that you use in other parts of the system. So here we can see the web address for that company if we wanted to make another order of that light bulb. So other examples of consumables would be things like oil filters on some piece of machinery that need to be periodically replaced, or oil or fuels of some type. So in technical collections or transport collections, that comes up. And it can be things as simple as paper stock, that you might have artworks that rely on paper being periodically replaced inside some kind of mechanical artwork. We can see the physical aspect screen here in the background, and we can see those same 2 tables just appear on the first tab. So if you've got general objects in the collection, you can still record consumable information. If you had a vehicle, for instance, that's a catalogued collection item. And you can also record technical details. So again, the example of a vehicle, you might record things like engine specifics in the technical information table. Those are all examples where we're just cataloging individual records. In some cases, you may have complex items like the example of an album of photographs linking to individual discrete photographs, where you need to create them as separate catalog records. We've seen the examples of linking things together as related objects. That has a practical limit because you're having to link each of those on each record. So it's taking you some time to go to each of those and individually cross-link them. So we wouldn't normally recommend that for more than a few dozen links. If you've got a group of items which comprises of more than a few dozen related items, then it's best to either create a group record, as I will show you now, or to just have an authority term somewhere on the record that provides a way of grouping those. So for instance, all of the objects may share the same named collection or subject category or subject person. Those are all ways where you might group a set of records to say, well, these things are related without explicitly linking one by one each of those records. So let's have a look at group and member. I'll bring up an example of the album that I was talking about before. We can see when I search that it's found the album of farm photographs, and then it's automatically showing me the member records, or N for narrower records, that are already linked to it. I'll choose just to open the album of photographs for now. We've got an image showing one of the pages within that, and then we've got information which is in common across the whole album. In this case, the whole album is by one specific photographer, but we've got information saying what that whole series is about. I can then open up the group and member screen and see that list of related member records. If you're using group and member records, then we'd recommend making use of the level field so it's clear what level this particular catalogue represents. So in this case, we're cataloguing an album. I could go to the related member records, again with that shortcut button. And so now that I've got individual catalogue records for each photograph, I can do things like have discrete name titles and descriptions that are specific to each individual photograph, and things like the production dates might vary from photo to photo. If we go back to the group and member screen, we can see that link from the opposite direction. We've got a level where now we're saying that it's a photo from an album rather than the album. And then the next higher record is the way that we're linking to the record that sits above the individual photographs. So here we've got the link up to the next higher record of the album of farm photographs. Another example where you might use group and member records is for cataloging archives. So archival collections are often dealing with large volumes of material, and it's often not practical to catalog all of those things down to item level. Typically, you would start cataloging broad series of similar materials and just creating a record that represents each of those broad groupings. And then as you have time, you might create catalog records for significant records within there, or all of the items within a series that you're currently working on. Vernon CMS provides dedicated screens for presenting archive series and archive file and item information. But that's just using the same basic concept we looked at for albums and photographs. We've got a group record, which is going to represent the series. So in my case, I've got an archive series, which is called Vernon House Reports. And we can see again that it's linking to several narrower records. And again, we're making use of that level field to say what level does this particular object record represent. So this is a series record. Things like the production date can support a date range. So at this level, we might say, well, there's a whole range of dates covered, but once we get down to cataloguing individual items, you might have more precise production dates that relate to each of those. An archive series could potentially link to hundreds or thousands of items. So we don't display a full list of these here. We just show a count of them with a shortcut button to open the related items. If I click on View Members at this point, it opens up the related archive file and item window. This is a simple structure of just a series record linking to items, but you could have a multi-level structure if you wish. So for instance, there might be a second level representing files or folders within that archive box, and then a third level of the individual items. So here we see the links going the other way. We've got an individual item, and we can see the series level that it's linking back to. That can also be useful for public users when they're trying to search through your collection and understand what these different records represent. So if I look at a simple example of an archive online, this is a Vernon browser site, which is specifically archives, the Fletcher Trust Archives in Auckland. I've done a search on all of the records currently publicly available. So there's 91,000 objects, and they've presented the level field that we've been looking at as one of the main filters. So I can see there's over 3,000 broad series, and of those, 88,000 items are available. So I could immediately filter down the list to a subset of items. And it would be at item level that you might have individual photographs. So if I filter down to only the ones where we've got certain colors in the photographs, we can see now we're looking at specific items within a whole range of series. Vernon Browser also supports presenting those links between the records. So if I clicked on an individual record, so this is one item level object record back in Vernon CMS, we're presenting that same link that we saw back in Vernon to jump up, in this case, up to the series level record. And then vice versa, when you're on the series level record, we can see the relationship going the other way. Here, because often the items have images associated with them, we're showing in a lightbox panel. So that covers all of the different options that are available within Vernon for managing those different levels of information. And they give you some examples of how those features can be used. So thanks very much, everybody, for attending today's session.